Most people watching this will work for 40 years, hit their mid-60s, and realize the math never worked, not because they were lazy or irresponsible, but because they were taught to think like employees while hoping for the outcome of owners, and that mental mismatch quietly drains decades of opportunity. Here's the uncomfortable truth most retirement calculators won't tell you. Job security and financial security are not the same thing, and if you don't understand that early, you'll find yourself relying on Social Security, worried about Medicare costs, inflation, taxes, and whether your 401k balance can survive a 30-year retirement. So let me ask you something right now. Do you want comfort today or control tomorrow? And have you ever actually questioned the game you're playing? Because employee thinking looks safe, but it's a psychological trap disguised as stability, where you trade time for money, wait for permission, accept someone else's definition of your value, celebrate raises without questioning compounding, and optimize for safety instead of understanding. And here's the part no career counselor says out loud. Employment is a great income tool, but a terrible wealth building strategy. Because your employer pays you enough to stay and not enough to become financially independent, not out of malice but math, since profits only exist if value created exceeds compensation. So show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. Now here's the shift that changes everything. You can keep your job, contribute to your 401k, get the employer match, and still think like an owner, but only if you mentally separate cash flow from wealth. Because your salary pays bills while wealth comes from owning assets that compound over time, like diversified index funds in a taxable account, Roth IRA contributions growing tax-free, real estate, businesses, or skills that increase enterprise value. And let me pause and ask, have you ever calculated how much of your future depends on compounding versus raises, and what happens if inflation quietly eats 3% a year for the next 3 decades? Employee thinking is linear and capped. You work more hours for more pay until you can't, while owner thinking is exponential and uncapped, because compounding does the heavy lifting. And here's a simple math example to make this real. If you invest $6,500 a year into a Roth IRA starting at age 30 and earn an average 7% annually, you could have roughly $650 owed tax-free by 65, but if you wait until 45 to start, you might contribute the same total dollars and end up with less than half that, which means time mattered more than effort. And this is why mindset beats income, because the early years compound the longest. Now let me give you a quick case example. Imagine 2 coworkers earning the same $80,000 salary, both contributing to their 401k. One spends raises upgrading lifestyle and waits for promotions. The other keeps lifestyle steady, learns how businesses work, invests surplus into low-cost index funds, gradually builds skills beyond the job description, and maybe buys a small rental or invests in REITs inside a Roth. 30 years later, one is worried about property taxes, healthcare premiums, and whether Social Security rules will change, while the other has multiple income streams and optionality, same job, same paychecks, different thinking, different outcome. This is where psychology quietly destroys wealth, because incentive bias makes you focus on hours instead of outcomes. Authority bias trains you to stop thinking independently. And social proof convinces you the herd knows where it's going even when the herd is heading toward comfortable dependency. So try this inversion test. What guarantees financial mediocrity forever? And the answer is simple. Never own anything. Never build skills beyond your role. Never study how money actually works. And never question incentives. So if that's what creates failure, do the opposite, even in small ways. Owner thinking doesn't require quitting your job. In fact, a job can be the best training ground because stable income lets you take intellectual risk without risking rent money. So while you're earning, study how companies make money, read shareholder letters, understand unit economics, learn why some businesses have pricing power and others don't, and apply that thinking to your own life as a capital allocator. Because every dollar you spend is a vote for consumption, and every dollar you invest is a vote for future freedom. And let me ask you, do you see your paycheck as lifestyle fuel or seed capital? In the U.S. system, this matters even more because retirement responsibility has shifted to you. Pensions are rare, and your outcome depends on decisions around 401k allocations, IRA strategy, tax efficiency, and behavior during market volatility. not on loyalty or tenure. Here's another reality people avoid. Relying on a single employer is often riskier than diversified ownership because layoffs, automation, and economic cycles don't ask for permission, while diversified assets don't care where you work. And as technology and AI accelerate, repeatable employee tasks face pressure while ownership and decision making gain leverage. So the rational response isn't fear but adaptation. Own the companies deploying technology, build skills machines can't replicate, and position yourself on the side of scale. Now here's the practical framework. First, treat your job as income, not identity. Second, invest consistently using diversified, low-cost index funds appropriate to your risk tolerance. Third, prioritize tax-advantaged accounts like a 401k match and Roth IRA. Fourth, build skills that improve systems rather than just completing tasks. And fifth, think in decades, not quarters, because owner thinking is patient, while employee thinking demands immediate gratification, and patience is where compounding hides. People often say, I can't afford to think like an owner, but that's backwards, because owner thinking starts with curiosity, discipline, and learning, not money, and it costs nothing to read, analyze, and understand incentives, yet every year you delay is lost compounding you never get back. So whether you're 25 or 45, the best time to start was yesterday, and the second best time is now. Let me address the fear head on. No one is telling you to quit your job, take reckless risks, or chase get-rich-quick schemes. This is about building independence gradually, responsibly, and legally within the U.S. system. Understanding taxes vary, markets fluctuate, and investing involves risk, but also understanding that doing nothing is a decision with consequences. Here's the final question I want you to sit with when you picture yourself at 65. Do you want to be hoping policy changes don't derail your retirement? Or do you want assets working for you regardless of who you work for? Because the difference isn't luck, it's thinking, and the shift starts by separating income from wealth, choosing ownership over dependency, and letting time work in your favor. So if this changed how you see your paycheck, type OWNER in the comments. Subscribe for more US-focused money thinking without hype, and watch the next video where I break down exactly how to structure your first ownership portfolio step by step. And quick disclaimer before we close, this content is for education only, not financial advice. Investing involves risk, returns aren't guaranteed, and tax rules vary by individual situation. Most people don't realize this until it's too late, but if you follow the default path handed to you, work hard, stay loyal, collect raises, and wait patiently, you can spend 40 years working and still arrive at retirement with far less than you expected. Not because you failed, not because you were irresponsible, but because you were taught to think like an employee while quietly hoping for the outcome of an owner. And that single mismatch destroys wealth more reliably than bad luck ever could. This video might sound uncomfortable, but it can save you decades of financial frustration, because job security and financial security are not the same thing. And confusing the two is one of the most expensive mistakes in American personal finance, especially in a system where pensions are rare, healthcare costs keep rising, inflation slowly erodes purchasing power, Social Security rules can change, Medicare doesn't cover everything, and your retirement outcome depends largely on how you think, not just how much you earn. So before we go any further, let me ask you to mentally pause and consider this. If you keep thinking the same way about money for the next 30 years, where does that path realistically end? Because most people never ask that question, and that's why they're shocked at 65. Employee thinking feels safe because it's familiar, because it's socially approved, and because it's rewarded with short-term comfort, but it's actually a psychological trap disguised as stability, where you trade time for money, wait for permission, accept someone else's definition of your value, celebrate paychecks without questioning the system, and optimize for certainty instead of understanding. And here's the truth no career counselor, HR department, or glossy retirement brochure wants to say out loud. Employment is an excellent income source, but it is a terrible primary wealth building strategy, because jobs are designed to pay you fairly for your time, not to make you wealthy. And that's not evil or unfair, it's just math. Because if companies paid employees the full value they created, profits wouldn't exist, shareholders wouldn't be rewarded, and the business wouldn't survive. So employers pay enough to retain talent, but not enough to make employees financially independent. And once you understand incentives, outcomes stop being mysterious. This is where most people misunderstand the message, because thinking like an owner does not mean quitting your job, taking reckless risks, or starting a business tomorrow. It means changing how you think about money, time, and value while you keep earning, because you can absolutely have a job, collect a paycheck, contribute to your 401k, get the employer match, and still think like an owner. But you cannot build long-term wealth if your entire identity and strategy are built around trading hours for dollars forever. Employee thinking is linear. You work more hours, get a raise, maybe a promotion, but there's always a ceiling, because there are only so many hours you can sell, and only so much any role pays. While owner thinking is exponential, because ownership compounds, whether that ownership is in diversified index funds, businesses, real estate, intellectual property, or skills that increase enterprise value over time. And this difference is not philosophical, it's mathematical. Let me make this concrete with a simple example. Because math doesn't care about motivation or intention. If someone earns $70,000 in a year and gets a 3% raise annually for 30 years, they feel like they're progressing. But inflation at 3% quietly cancels most of that progress. And without ownership, they're running in place. Now compare that to someone who invests consistently, even modestly, say $500 per year into a Roth IRA starting at age 30, term market return of around 7%. By age 65, that account alone could grow to roughly $650,000 tax-free. And that's without counting a 401k, employer match, or taxable investments. But if that same person waits until age 45 to start, even if they invest more aggressively, they may end up with less than half that amount. And that gap isn't effort, it's time, because compounding rewards early ownership, not late urgency. This is why mindset matters more than income, because owner thinking prioritizes compounding early, while employee thinking delays ownership until someday, and someday is usually too late. Let me give you a short case example that mirrors what happens every day in America. Two coworkers earn the same salary, work the same hours, and have access to the same benefits. One spends raises upgrading lifestyle, buys a nicer car, increases monthly expenses, and assumes future promotions will solve future problems. The other keeps lifestyle inflation under control, maxes the employer 401k match, contributes to a Roth IRA, invests surplus into low-cost diversified index funds, learns how businesses make money, and gradually builds skills beyond the job description. Maybe learning about real estate economics, cash flow, or market valuation. Fast forward 30 years and the first person is anxious about healthcare costs, property taxes, market downturns, and whether Social Security will be enough, while the second has multiple income streams, optionality, and flexibility, not because they were smarter or luckier, but because they thought differently from the beginning. The reason employee thinking is so sticky is psychology, not intelligence. Because incentive bias trains you to focus on hours worked instead of value created. Authority bias teaches you to defer thinking to managers and policies. And social proof convinces you that if everyone around you is climbing the same ladder, that ladder must lead somewhere worthwhile, even when it leads to comfortable dependency rather than independence. So here's a powerful inversion exercise. Instead of asking, "How do I get rich?" ask, "What guarantees I stay financially dependent forever?" And the answers are surprisingly simple. Never own anything. Never develop skills beyond your role. Never learn how money actually works. Never question incentives. And always follow the herd. So if those behaviors guarantee failure, then avoiding them dramatically increases your odds of success without requiring genius. Owner thinking begins with separating income from wealth. Your job is cash flow, and cash flow is useful, but wealth comes from assets that work when you don't. And in the U.S. system, that means understanding tax-advantaged accounts like 401(k)s and rationally, depending entirely on one employer in a volatile economy is often riskier than owning diversified assets across industries, geographies, and asset classes, especially when layoffs, automation, and economic cycles are outside your control, while ownership, even small ownership, creates resilience. This matters even more going forward, because technology, automation, and AI are reducing the value of repeatable tasks while increasing the value of ownership, decision-making, and capital allocation. And that's not pessimism, it's observation. So the rational response isn't fear, it's adaptation. Owning the companies deploying technology, investing in innovation through diversified funds, and building skills that machines can't easily replicate. Now let's get practical, because owner thinking without action is just entertainment. First, treat your job as income, not identity. Second, always capture free money like employer 401 matches. Third, invest consistently in diversified, low-cost index funds aligned with your risk tolerance. Fourth, prioritize tax efficiency using Roth IRAs or HSAs when appropriate. Fifth, build skills that improve systems rather than just completing tasks, because system thinkers are valuable everywhere. And sixth, think in decades, not quarters, because compounding doesn't reward impatience. Here's another simple math example that illustrates opportunity cost. If you spend $500 a month on lifestyle upgrades you don't truly need, that's $6 in a year. Invested at 7% over 30 years, that could grow to over $600, which means small recurring decisions matter far more than dramatic one-time choices. And owner thinking is simply the habit of seeing those trade-offs clearly. People often say, I need my job, I have bills, I can't afford to think like an owner. But that misunderstands the message, because no one is telling you to quit, take reckless risks, or chase get-rich-quick schemes. This is about gradually shifting how you allocate money, time, and attention while staying responsible, and understanding that doing nothing is also a decision with consequences. Consider retirement reality in the U.S. Social Security was never designed to replace full income. Medicare doesn't eliminate healthcare costs. Inflation erodes fixed incomes. And longevity risk means many people will spend 25 to 30 years in retirement, which means relying solely on wages and hoping everything works out is not a strategy. It's a gamble, while ownership provides flexibility, whether that's drawing from investments, adjusting spending, or choosing when and how you work. Here's a critical psychological insight. People fear losing what they have more than they value gaining something better. So they cling to job security even when that security is fragile, while avoiding ownership because it feels uncertain. But the risk of staying dependent is often greater than the risk of diversified ownership. And owner thinking acknowledges that reality instead of avoiding it. Another powerful concept is optionality. Employees optimize for one outcome, keeping the job, while owners optimize for multiple outcomes. This investment works or that one does. This skill opens several doors. This decision creates flexibility, and optionality means you're never trapped, because when one door closes, others exist, and that's invaluable in a changing economy. Let's address education, because many people study their field deeply and nothing else, becoming excellent employees in narrow domains, while owners study broadly psychology, economics, math, systems, and then go deep where opportunity is asymmetric, and that multidisciplinary thinking multiplies value. Because understanding incentives helps you invest better, understanding probability helps you avoid bad bets, and understanding psychology helps you control your own behavior during market volatility. Knowledge alone isn't enough, though, because knowledge without application is just entertainment. Owner thinking means applying what you learn consistently, even when it's boring, even when no one is watching, even when the payoff feels far away, because compounding is invisible at first and obvious at the end. Here's a reality most people avoid. Many would rather fail conventionally than succeed unconventionally, because social approval feels safer than independent thinking. So colleagues may not understand why you're reading annual reports instead of watching TV. Friends may not understand why you invest instead of upgrading lifestyle. Family may question why you think long-term instead of living for today. But 30 years from now, those opinions won't pay your bills. Your assets will. The difference between employee and owner thinking shows up clearly in how people use raises. Employees see raises as permission to spend more. Owners see raises as increased investment capacity, and that single difference, repeated over decades, creates radically different outcomes. Now let's talk about patience, because employee thinking is impatient. It wants results now. Raises now, promotions now, gratification now. While owner thinking is patient, it builds weights, reinvests, and allows time to do the heavy lifting. And patience is a competitive advantage precisely because most people lack it. None of this requires brilliance, genius, or perfect timing. It requires avoiding big mistakes, not overspending, not panic selling, not chasing hype, not confusing activity with progress, and not assuming income equals wealth. Because consistently not being stupid beats occasional brilliance every time. Here's the final framework to remember. Your salary is seed capital. Every dollar you earn is a dollar you can allocate. The employee sees income as lifestyle fuel. The owner sees it as investment capital. And that perspective shift alone can be worth millions over a lifetime. You're going to spend the next 30 years working, earning, deciding, and allocating resources either way. The only question is whether you'll do it with employee thinking or owner thinking. Because one path leads to dependency and anxiety, and the other leads to flexibility and independence. Even if the journey looks boring along the way, imagine yourself at 65. Do you want to be hoping policies don't change, markets don't crash, and employers keep you around? Or do you want assets working quietly in the background regardless of who you work for? Because that outcome is shaped now, not later. And the shift starts with how you think about time, value, and ownership. Let me be clear before we close. This content is for education only, not financial advice. Investing involves risk, markets fluctuate, and tax rules vary by individual situation. But understanding these principles gives you a framework to make better decisions within the U.S. financial system. If this changed how you see your paycheck, type OBUNER in the comments so I know you're thinking differently. Subscribe for more no-hype U.S. personal finance content, and watch the next video where I break down a simple step-by-step ownership strategy using 401ks, Roth IRAs, and index funds that beginners can actually follow without overwhelm.